Hi, it's Body Conversations, and it's June 2026, and there's a lot happening in the exercise business. And then, of course, now Pilates is number one. Please remember, I'm a person who started as a client in the 60s when no one who does Pilates today, if they had been alive, would have even tried it. But now it's number one. And of course, now people are saying it's just a fad and not helping, and on and on. Hallie Bieber, a major big deal celebrity, thinks it's a fad. And that means that it's a bubble and it's going to burst. So, of course, no one in the Pilates world is talking about it because they never admit anything. And it's the elephant in the room. And obviously, I'm the person to address it since I'm the person who made it a household name. In 1991, I started the Institute for the Pilates Method, and that's why you know the name today. And that's also why the people who didn't have a pot to piss in, frankly, and those are the most well-known names in the Pilates world, and they sat on the floor in Santa Fe and, heard a workshop that one of these so-called elders gave. That's how we started it all. Now they go on and become big celebrities themselves and run around the world to places where they don't know anything about this method, and then they get up and do Pilates pontification, as I call it. But anyway, the fact when I look back over this, and I go back to 1991 and my starting this, which I regret, it's amazing I could get it out there. When I think now, almost every week when I'm using the Cadillac, for example, and I realize how complicated all of these attachments are, and this spring for this and that spring for something else, and on and on and on. And so we have all of that and this huge, expensive equipment that's hard to maintain. And there's just not one positive thing other than I think the essence of the method is, of course, because it's based on biotensegrity, which is a word that probably almost no one even knows what it means. But let's talk about the name. The name, of course, people couldn't even pronounce it. They would call it the Pilates or the Pilates, but of course all they thought of was Pontius Pilate. So you have a name you're trying to get people to know, understand, and then relate to this method when they had just come off, this is 1991, 2 decades of beat your body up with aerobics, Jane Fonda and everybody else, right? And at the very end, and one of the Pilates teachers who's most well known told me that in San Francisco in 1989, he was teaching a 2-hour dance aerobic class, and it wasn't enough. By that time, most of these women were heavier than they thought they'd ever be, and they kept thinking the more they beat up their body, the faster they lose weight. Of course, was just the opposite. But so we started it. We should not have used the name because it meant nothing. It was hard to pronounce and, referenced someone that's infamous. But we did because we knew it wasn't a registered trademark. It had been registered and it had slipped by, which is something that happens. And it was Romana who claims to have been given the method by Joe Pilates, which she wasn't. But anyway, so she registered it, and ultimately, of course, as everyone should know, in 2000, October 19th, Judge Cedarbaum in New York invalidated the registration. And I guess for some people today, when they look at these reformer classes, most of them are not really Pilates, but women love it. They love to be on the reformer and take a selfie and listen to Taylor Swift. And so people say if it hadn't been, invalidated, and it was still controlled by this small group who now call themselves classical Pilates, we wouldn't have reformer classes. And maybe that's true. I can't tell you. I did the very first reformer class. I think it was 1993. There were 4 reformers. That's all we had. I put them in a starburst configuration, and the teacher was standing in the center to change the springs because nobody changed springs then. So anyway, it was a failure. The people who I recruited were clients of our studio in Santa Fe, and they hated it. They hated being in the same position for a long time because that's not the order that Joe created. So right now, it's upsetting that people are talking about Pilates being a fad when it represents the only organized exploration of biotensecurity. And now that's being adopted by people who are talking about somatics, and books are coming out about somatics. And of course, this is not because people are finally beginning to understand how the body works. I wish that were the case. It's not the case. It's simply that it's a reaction to the beat up your body on a bike thing that has dominated. And if it's not a bike, it's something else. Over the weekend, all sorts of posts on Instagram about how they're closing up SoulCycle. Equinox paid a fortune of money for this dopey company. And now, of course, Orange Theory, probably soon will be Barry's Bootcamp. They're all the same. You do whatever you can, following some instructor who knows nothing, to sweat. And then you feel like you're burning up calories. And that's really the only reason people do it. Now, obviously, it's been an abysmal failure. 70% of the population is now classified as obese of the American population. Now, of course, the BMI was a fraud, but, you know, for 10 years, people have been talking about, oh, maybe we shouldn't use the BMI. They didn't even know there was a replacement for the HAMWI, HAMWI, which was accurate. So, yes, BMI, yes, it's not good if you play for the NFL. It's going to make you seem obese when you're not, but that's not the reason. The reason is we don't do it the way Japan or China or any of the smart countries, where the cutoff is 25. That becomes obesity. If we had used that, we would have known a long time ago, and the millions of people who died from COVID who didn't know they were fat might have taken other precautions. So, or maybe even lost the weight since they weren't going out to parties or having cupcakes every week for someone's birthday. So here we are. It's, 60 years after the diet and fitness revolution started, and fortunately we now have a solution. But the company, which is PhysicalMind Institute, which is the name we changed to when it was too difficult to keep using Pilates, and I wish we had thought of it before, but there was no category of body-mind, because if we had used it, we would have been even further advanced. We actually started using it and trademarked it in 1995. But we had millions of dollars of lawsuits from Sean and Romana, Sean Gallagher and Romana. Sean was her final pimp and her best, and it was a 10-year battle fighting this name. So it's a funny time now. I can remember when I left Santa Fe and came back to New York in 2000, and occasionally I'd hear someone talk about their Pilates class. I mean, I had done the first mat work certification. I mean, we did the first everything certification, but then we split off mat work because I thought, well, they stole my mini reformer, which was making millions on QVC. So I would do mat work, and it took off, and everybody loved it, even though the mat work unassisted is pretty useless for most people other than some skinny dancers. And of course, now people do it with, 5 props. But the best prop, the universal prop, is Try 4X. So at any rate, what you see is a tremendous change coming. And it's not because people are smarter and they finally figured out the mistakes. It's still calories in, calories out. They're always talking about eat healthy and exercise more. They haven't figured out its hormones. There's no catchy phrase to make you understand, though I came up with one recently, and I don't even know if people understand that instead of eat healthy and exercise more, or calories in, calories out, I'm saying eat small but broad. Now, of course, that's the exact opposite of every single diet ever conceived of. Now, yet diets are out of favor, we can't even use the word, but people still think about what they're eating rather than how much. They refuse to think about how much because that would then change everything. They refuse to think about their own body and what it needs to be better. I mean, Joe Pilates talked about his method to help people develop a uniformly balanced body, and that of course is the essence of what it is. But that's not what fitness has been about. It's been about, a six-pack or bigger biceps or beating up your body on some exercise machine so you sweat, so you get rid of the calories that you shouldn't have ingested. And who knows where it's going at this point, because the entire industry, whether it's Pilates or just the regular fitness industry, is sort of in a state of panic. I guess that's the only way I can describe it, though it's all covered up and everybody is rah-rah because everything is rah-rah. I mean, that's why you have to have music if you go into the dentist's office, right? Because nobody can live in America with silence. It's too scary. They have to feel artificially lifted. And I always think it's funny when I go to my health club, which is Lifetime. It's this gorgeous health club around the corner from where I live. And they're playing music. And the only place they don't play it is in the pool area, which is where I go because I don't want to hear the music. But everybody's got their earplugs in, whether they're listening to their phone or they have some music from Spotify or whatever. It's as if, why are you paying for music on overhead speakers when everybody has their own speaker in their ear? But again, that's connecting the dots, and that doesn't happen in America because everyone has to just keep doing what they're doing. Because if you criticize something, then what happens is that you're not a rah-rah person, and that's what we want to be, rah-rah. So it's really funny when I say that, rah-rah, because my younger son, Roger, has a name that for a little child, it's hard to pronounce, I guess, and so his nieces, my granddaughters, when he was with them, would not say Roger, they'd say rah-rah. And he's the least rah-rah person because he's extremely smart. And then, of course, on top of that, he's tall and handsome and successful, which is only good if you're a celebrity. If you're not a celebrity, then people are afraid of you, and that's what everything is now, fear. So when I look back about all these years of Pilates and how it was ignored, I mean, in 1991 when I started this, I tried to get people in the regular fitness world and health clubs, whenever interested, and they laughed at it, they ridiculed it. Individuals, we were in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which at that time was hip syndrome. That's where everybody in the country wanted to take a trip if you thought you were hip. And it's, of course, it's a beautiful place, so that's a good reason to go. And there's, different cultures, etc. So because all these articles were coming out in the media, and when I think about it, I was thrilled, of course, and I was responsible. I wrote a letter. I made up this letter saying Candace Bergen, Lou Gossett, and now Oprah and Madonna do it, so you should too, and send it out. Every editor, every journalist who wrote about, there was no wellness then, exercise. They all wrote about exercise. Meredith Luce, who's my friend and partner in 80 Bytes, said she thinks either Popular Mechanics probably started a section on exercise. How do you nail something and burn more calories? I mean, that's how obsessive it was. But anyway, when I sent out these letters to the press about it, and it was fortunate that there was a big article in Elle magazine, which was published in October 1991, so I had something to start with. They started to publish articles. I mean, hundreds of articles, not just in Shape and Self, but in the New York Times and on CNN and everywhere else. Why? Only one reason. No one was interested in the method. Nobody could even understand it. It was, and pronouncing Pilates, but it was a celebrity. So when Hallie says something, this famous celebrity, people will listen. And they should, because celebrities are what made Pilates. Ultimately, that's what got it out there. The media wanted, and I remember telling the story to someone at the end of 1999, almost 2000. I was speaking with a celebrity from some magazine, and about a celebrity, to a journalist. And then she said to me impatiently, "Okay, we know her. Anyone else?" It was like, do you have any more names to drop of people doing Pilates? Because that means that we have something to say, we can publish it, right? And of course, when you look at all the articles, and let's face it, they are what caused the name to lose the registration, because the articles were all written using Pilates in a generic sense, legally generic. And they were delivered to Judge Cedarbaum. There were 6 books, copies, Xeroxes of all these articles. Each one was the size of what the New York Times, the New York City phone book used to be, 40 years ago when there was a big phone book, right? But at any rate, what it was an avalanche of media, of articles, of interest, and they were all the same. When I look at these articles going back all through the 90s and even the beginning of the 2000s, it was just the same article. This man in Europe is in England. He's interned during World War I because he's German, but really he was Greek, but living in Germany. And people were getting influenza in these internment camps, so he devised something with the bed springs so that people could exercise, and then apparently they got better. Whatever it is, it's a good, nice story. And then eventually came to New York in 1926, broke and had with nothing, and he got a little studio on 8th Avenue, and fortunately, he met George Balanchine and Martha Graham, and they started sending their dancers. Dancers had never done regular exercise because they didn't want to bulk up. And they didn't need to torch any calories because they didn't really eat. And that's what kept him going. And he got even more articles. I mean, it's amazing how many articles. I started doing Pilates because I was working at Scholastic Magazines and Books 1963, and I'm in the library, and I think it was Life magazine, there was a big article about Joe Pilates. And why did I read that article? Because I'm related to what was called the strong man of Europe, whose name was Sigmund Breibart, but he went under the name Samson. And Werner Herzog made a movie about him called Invincible. So to me, it was interesting. I'd never done any exercise. Nobody had done exercise. Women did not exercise, didn't want to sweat. So I was interested, and I knew they must have known one another because of the timing and when they both came to New York and etc. But Today you hear people talking about, these people who are the so-called master teachers like Jillian Hessel. Oh, I went into the studio back in the 80s and I was so intimidating. I was so intimidated. And of course, maybe they were. They probably weren't. It's just that that's what you have to say so that it appears like, oh, I did it and I was intimidated, so you should do it. Again, phony, phony, phony. And that's really how you describe this. So it's interesting because the entire exercise business is at a crossroads. No one knows what'll happen. Whether you're running a health club or you have some boutique. Apparently F45 is also on the rails now. So we see that the boutiques that are not yoga or Pilates, there are a few gyrotonics, are really in trouble. And they're closing up. And of course, what's annoying to me is that there's no post-mortem, no analysis about what they were selling, because all they were doing was just selling sweat. That's what they were selling. And the people bought into it and then messed up their bodies. In other words, this exercise caused people to become obese. Now, no one can understand that, but it'll gradually be explained because pharmaceutical companies are working on so many improvements that relate to how to regulate your hormones, which of course became unregulated by this kind of exercise and all the binge eating, which were a result of the diets, right? So it's all very clear, but it goes against what the branding is. And since branding is all people relate to, because they don't really think, they don't have any common sense, it's very hard for people to comprehend how something that looks so good and has a great name and everyone's smiling and saying things is stupid, because almost all of them are stupid. So anyway, I was born in New York, 1941, St. Luke's Hospital, still here. And I never thought, even after, I was my 20s and I started doing Pilates, that I would ever see on almost every street corner some Pilates studio or a health club that had Pilates or whatever. Couldn't even imagine it. And now when I walk around my hometown, Manhattan, there are Pilates studios everywhere. I mean, I think to myself, wait, am I on a new street? Because there's two here, and I thought that there was only one last week, right? And that's why people are saying it's a bubble. I Googled it. And in Manhattan, there are supposedly 800 Pilates studios. That's more than Starbucks. And Starbucks is still expanding. They're opening up a huge location right across the street from where I live in Chelsea. So, wow. I mean, obviously 800 Pilates studios in one town, Manhattan, is not sustainable. It's not going to work. They're going to go out of business. And for PhysicalMind Institute, it's just great. I mean, sorry people will maybe lose their life savings, but what I'm telling you is we have anticipated this and we created all of these products that will help studios, whether it's yoga or Pilates or maybe anything, have things to retail that are really helpful for people's bodies. As I record this, I'm going to finish up and go uptown to Mount Sinai Hospital, where my older son is in excruciating pain, and he's going to be having a spinal operation in a few hours. For the past year, he's done Pilates once a week, but he works with these celebrity trainers and does all these things that people who do branding and longevity tell him to do. Of course, that's all over now because he realizes finally that his mother knows best and he has a long road to fix his body. But I have a product called Smart Seat, and we've sold Smart Seats, but nowhere near what the number we should. And he will be using it regularly. And even though he had it, he didn't use it because it's too hard to understand. It doesn't look like other seats for posture. It doesn't, because it's smart. And it has a purpose that the other ones don't have. So I'm not going to talk about it too much because apparently we have very few, and the shipment hasn't arrived yet to be in Amazon everywhere, Europe, US, Canada, Japan, and then, of course, our own warehouse. But it's an example of one product. I'm coming to the point where I will say that if people, and I don't mean all 8 billion of them, because, maybe 3 billion are barely able to cope or starving, but certainly 1 billion are not using one of the Physical Mind products, which start at 99 cents, and it's the first one everyone should buy, which is called 80 Bites, then, I don't really care about what's going to happen to their body, because I already know they're going to be using up a lot of medical expense and time and whatever, because everything pretty much that people have been told for 60 years is inadequate or just downright wrong. And it's time for people to wake up and understand their own bodies and what they need. And we have the right programming and products for today's modern body, regardless of the size. So is Pilates a fad? Nobody knows. And is there a bubble, and is it going to burst? And if so, when? And the regular fitness world is sprinkling wellness around because it's sort of the exact opposite of the 2-hour aerobic class, or beat up your body on a Peloton or whatever. It looks like it's soft and light and gentle, and they don't know what to do because they don't understand the body. And so you have these huge health clubs, and they're trying to figure out how do they keep people coming to them when we have these GLP drugs, which will solve the problem that they went to the health club for anyway. And I hope they do. And I hope they recognize that we have those solutions. But at any rate, because health clubs and boutique studios, they're great. I wish there were even more on every street corner. Obviously, they're very good retail tenants, and Jeff Bezos ruined retail, so we need other tenants. But we also need better bodies, and hopefully people will recognize the mistakes.